nonprofit, and from commerce world. So we've got it all in Dick Schlosberg, and we'll read him in a minute. Dick, what we usually do is go around the table very quickly to give you a sense of who's here, right? And so people say who they are and what department they're in, or whether they've just flown to hear you or not. Right. So why don't we take a start from here?
My name is Todd Mayberry, and I'm a student in Woods class this semester. I also work over at UP School.
Barry Varela, I work with Ed at the Center for Strategic Planning.
I'm Mo Balaket. I'm from the Mandel Foundation of Israel, and I'm here to do my postdoc.
My name is Pierre Kletz. Pierre Kletz, very easy for American hearings. I am here from Israel too, but for a much shorter time than I need because I'm here for 3 days. I am a vice president of the Mandel Foundation, and I am a professor in Ben-Gurion University in Beersheba, in Jamaica.
My name is Maureen Ritchie. I'm a second year MPP student.
David Bramlett, a second year MPP student here.
Sam Rauschenberg, second year MPP as well.
Lauren Hungerlin, second year MPP. Trisha Rowan, same thing, second year MPP.
Megan Goodrich, first year MPP.
Hi, I'm Emily Peterson, a first year MPP.
I'm Kay Stratton. I'm a senior fellow at MDC, which is a nonprofit organization doing research and demonstration programs throughout the South.
Jamie Attard. I'm a second year dual MPP and MBA.
Ted Fisk, I'm an education writer.
Joel Huber, I'm a professor at business school. I'm Marty Martin. I'm an attorney in private practice representing nonprofit and tax-exempt organizations.
I'm Rich Schmalbeck. I'm a professor in the law school.
I'm Joel Fleischman. I'm teaching Sanford School of Public Policy and Philanthropy and the law school. You have to do it.
I'm Kathy Schlosberg, and I'm married to Dick.
Well, you're more than that.
I'm Mary Collins, and I work with Barry and Ed at the Center for Strategic Philanthropy.
I'm Catherine Burnett. I'm with the Keenan Charitable Trust.
Anthony?
I'm Anthony Stowe. I teach global health here at San Francisco.
Jay Hamilton. I'm the director of the DeWitt Wallace Center for Media and Democracy.
I'm Fiona Morgan. I'm my MPP here, and I work with Jay at the Center for the DeWitt Wallace Center for Media and Democracy. And I'm Cindy Rarity with the North Carolina Network of Grant Makers.
Sorry I didn't see you there. Dick is, what we say, pretty bad guy. He's been, as we know, former president of Packard Foundation. In the process of setting up a new foundation at the Air Force Academy, which he's and on the board of the Kaiser Family Foundation in California, the preeminent foundation providing facts, figures, and analysis of health policy and what might be done about it. So his career is very distinguished in our sector, but also was publisher of the LA Times and the Denver Post, I think. I got it right. Okay, so he has seen our world from many different angles, continues to serve on a number of boards, now lives in San Antonio. And I'm going to turn it over to you. And the title you said was A Tale of Three Foundations.
Yeah, and what effective foundations look like. That's a couple of disclaimers. So we'll talk about that. Right. First thing I'd like to do, my turn? Let me just say, Kathy is here. She really talked about herself. Kathy is an educator herself and is an adjunct professor at a small university in San Antonio. And she and I moved to San Antonio 6 years ago. Our son moved there about 10 years ago, and our daughter moved there about 8 years ago. And I took him out to dinner one night when I was visiting him in San Antonio, and I said, I know you all left home a long time ago, but I think home is going to follow. And they said, Dad, you have to be kidding, but we actually did it, so we moved there to be around the kids and grandkids. So that's the reason we live in San Antonio. Now,
They haven't subsequently moved out.
No, they haven't subsequently moved. The only tension we have is Kathy and I have 4 granddaughters, and we are finding that this is probably a little bit more my problem than hers that on some days I actually don't want to be their grandfather. I want to be their father. Take over. But that hasn't worked out too well. I mentioned to Mary this morning, sitting here between Ed and Joel. You all remember Disneyland or Sesame Street a long time ago? They used to have Grover, and he used to kind of do this. One of these things, doesn't look like the others. I'm kind of awed here being between Ed and Joel, I will tell you. So I'm talking to you today from a spirit of humility, and that while I left the private sector full-time in 1999, I've been involved with, as Ed said, the Packard Foundation, and now for the last several years, the Kaiser Family Foundation, which I've chaired, starting my 4th year right now. So I've been involved in the philanthropic scene rather late in life, and I am in a process of still highly curious and highly inquisitive, and have formed some hypothesis about what effective and impactful foundations look like, which I will share with you today. But I want to be sure you know that this is a work in process for me, and with humility I'm going to share it with you. But and I'm looking forward to that, but I'm looking forward to learning from you too, just from hearing around. I know a lot of you have insights that I'd like to get. Being here today I feel a little bit like the parish priest who got called by the Vatican and said, why don't you come up and talk to the Cardinal and a couple of my folks about how you're doing in church. And this is somewhat of an interesting experience for me, in that, and I love the fact that when Joel had talked to me about coming here several months ago, it got me thinking about what effectiveness really looks like. And so what I'd like to do is share with you, to help you calibrate my camera angle on this, tell you a little bit about my foundation experience, share with you some wow moments I had when I joined the nonprofit sector and foundations. Then talk about what are the real essential ingredients of effectiveness that I've seen. And then finally some thoughts about the future. Now does that sound like worth talking about? And Joel and Ed kick me if I ever get too far offline here. So let me tell you a little bit about the Packard Foundation, just so you can calibrate my experience there. Packard Foundation is an international foundation, international grant-making foundation with an annual budget of around $250 million, plus or minus a year. It used to be higher than that prior to the downturn. 3 major areas: population and reproductive health for women, conservation of the environment, and children, families, and communities. We call those 3. In addition, we have supported several institutions in the local area which we're committed to. And our general approach is that of being partnered. One of the decisions that a foundation makes of this size is, when does your strategy in brain power and leadership stop and the grantees' strategy in brain power and leadership take over? We generally err on the side of sooner rather than later, and invest greatly in good grantees. For us, finding high-quality grantees is very important. When we do, we use all of our resources, as we knew them, to move the cause. We use not only grant making is the major thing, of course, but we had over $100 million of what's called program-related investments. We had a lot of meetings where we brought major people together. We had a lot of collaboration. We had very active engagement in the field, and we used a lot of advisors. We were all in what we tried to do. The foundation was guided by certain values, and every foundation I know says they have values, or organizations do. Values were a big deal at Packard. It had to do with integrity, respect, thinking big, a belief in effectiveness, and a belief in individual leadership. When some of our people didn't work out at Packard, it had more to do with values at a sink than technical competence at a sink. So that's sort of the Packard world. And there were not many places, I often told Kathy, I said, going from publisher of the Los Angeles Times, it was hard to think of something that would be as wildly interesting, and it turns out the Packard Foundation was twice as interesting in a lot of ways because it was so undefined, and I'll get to some of the issues about that in a minute. But it was probably the most interesting and delicious job I ever had. And I've always said, compared to the dailiness of newspapers, the quarterly imperatives of performance, angry advertisers, the readers, this job was fantastic. Someone said, well, how come you left it after a certain amount of time? And the answer is, well, compared to going to soccer games and picking up my grandkids and being around my family, then the job wasn't that good. So we switched over. But it was a fantastic job, and for which I will ever be grateful to the Packard family for giving me that opportunity. I was blessed having several good senior people, one of which is now the CEO. She's also the chairman of the Council on Foundations and is a great executive and taught me a lot about the foundation world when I was there. Carol Larson, preeminent person. I know she's been here before, and she's just terrific. The Kaiser Family Foundation is sort of an oddball. It doesn't make grants. Did you all know that? It makes no grants. You know what it does? It's a little bit like my old business. The Kaiser Family Foundation gives information. And they give information in a very narrow niche. In health and health policy. The Kaiser Foundation has its own staff. We do our own policy analysis and research. We are essentially the go-to organization for Congress, for policymakers, and for the healthcare community for unbiased, straight information. When you think about, I had such an affinity for Kaiser, and I got to know the Kaiser people when I was at Packard. We were about 10 miles apart. So when I left Packard, I got involved with Drew and his people. The idea being, in the press world, the idea is that we would give people what they needed in their daily life, and they would have the correct information to make decisions. And the Kaiser Family Foundation gives health and health policy information to allow policymakers to make good decisions as well. One of the program changes of the last several years had to do with one of our program areas was to train what we call Kaiser Fellows to help beat reporters and news organizations understand better the health policy issues of our day. With what's happened in the media, as most of you know, those ranks have been curtailed quite a bit. And thus, we have decided to form our own news organization. Now we have an organization called Kaiser Health News. So I would recommend to all of you, khn.org. And this provides information, again, aimed more at the public than at policymakers and healthcare professionals. So we kind of span all sectors. In addition, we're involved with some campaigns, not traditional PSA campaigns, but campaigns in which we partner with MTV, BET, Fox, Univision, helping young people learn how to be more healthful, particularly with prevention of STDs, HIV/AIDS, and these kind of issues. Wonderfully well-run foundation, operating foundation, and I was mentioning to Ed before, you can imagine being energized for a long period of time, constantly. The CEO of the Kaiser Family Foundation just celebrated his 20th year as CEO. That is a very hard thing to do, to stay energized. It's not hard to be CEO a long time. It's hard to be renewed and energized. So that is to me a remarkable feat, and he does a great job. So again, I've been blessed by seeing that operation at work. Additionally, I don't think I had mentioned I'm on the board of the Community Foundation where I live. So I have the camera angle into what the Community Foundation does. We just had a new CEO. That's another wonderful experience which provides a special service to the people in San Antonio. Academy is very interesting in that I'm a graduate there, as Ed said, but we had no mechanism for private philanthropy to support a public institution. I've been involved with the Smithsonian Institution, and I think some of you may know probably a third of the support of the Smithsonian Institution is private philanthropy. We had none at the Air Force Academy. So we had a chance to actually start up. I'm a founding director at the Air Force Academy Foundation. So start from scratch, what does a new foundation look like? And that's basically to support the charitable requirements of the Air Force Academy. So with all that, that's sort of my hands-on experience. Working with the Packard Foundation, particularly, I should tell you that we probably work with 850 to 900 nonprofits a year, a lot. Got to see, and our grants were from anywhere from $5 million to $50 million. Organizations from startups to very mature. We had probably 2/3 of our grants were multi-year, but 20% of our grants, maybe 25% of our grants were to new grantees every year. So we kind of kept newness and innovation occurring as much as we could. Very tough line to walk. So saw a lot. So given all that, before I get into what my view is effectiveness looks like, let me share with you what happens when I go from a whole career at age 55 to this. I get parachuted into the nonprofit sector. Like a lot of business leaders, I was involved in the nonprofit sector as a volunteer and being on several boards, and I always found it very fascinating and interesting. And I saw this tree over there called Philanthropy, and I got a pretty good beat on it. I saw it over there. And someone asked me the other day, boy, I bet you wish you knew back then what I know now. And I thought, and I said, you know what's funny? I kind of wish I knew now what I thought I knew back then, because as I got closer to that tree, as I got parachuted into that tree, you know what happened is this tree is like a big redwood tree. And the more you bore into it, there's a ring, and then there's another ring, and then there's another ring. I want to report to you now, I think I'm getting near the bottom of it, into this tree, but I'm not sure because I keep hitting the rings. So it was a fascinating experience for me. But I had a couple of mega reactions to the foundation world and the nonprofit world. I spent a lot of time with nonprofits. As soon as I found out I was going to be back and just pal around with a couple of our grantees and just to bond a little bit and to learn and to listen. First thing, this is a very human thing, I felt the weight of quarterly and performance off my back. Now the benefit of that is we had long periods of time to get things done. But suddenly I felt, wow, this is feeling good. It felt refreshing to me. And the burden of not having to get something done quickly was encouraging. I remember, I'll tell you that story a little bit later, but first of all, the burden of time, much less. Second was, I was shocked at how many great leaders there were at the nonprofits I visited. I mean, charismatic, mission-oriented, non-ego-driven, totally focused on getting things done. And then as you get stuck around and stayed a while, understaffed, underserved, poor equipment, and when you push them, they'd say, well, we can't afford it. We can't afford it, i.e. costs are bad. And in my world, that wasn't the case because cost was the input cost, but you also output, you had metrics, and you had a different output. There wasn't any output of dollars. And it became clear to me that what you saw compared to the private sector, in which I saw a lot of management, but not that many really good leaders. In the nonprofit sector, you actually see a lot of leaders, you know, but not very good managers. Yeah, you know what I mean? So it was sort of an aha moment for me. And of course, the third thing was the fuzziness and difficulty of all of the nonprofits in telling you what they did and how effective they were. Now, the other thing I learned is I would ask them, these were our grantees, about how effective they were and what they did. The first thing I learned, I'd say, well, you know, and remember, this is my first 6 months I'm doing this. Well, you know, did the Packard grant, you know, help you and all? And the answer was, almost without exception, saved our life. Couldn't have done it without you. It was probably the most significant thing we've done. That's all. Well, was it effective in doing what you wanted? Effectively shot the lights out. It was fantastic. Thank you. And as you go around, you realize that the very weird feedback loop really doesn't exist easily for a foundation to find out about in partnership with the grantees. Even though we saw ourselves as partners, it was very hard for them. My first day at the Packard Foundation, after I kind of did my loop with the nonprofits, I had a program officer who came in here and said, Dick, there's something you need to know. One of the fun things about being new to the field is everybody wants to give you their wisdom according to how they see the world, and it was fun to learn. Well, this program officer says, you know what? Giving away this money, it's a lot harder than raising it. I said, would you please never say that again? And I realized that the program staff at a foundation doesn't feel at all the unrelenting drumbeat of having to raise money all the time. It just isn't part of how they see it, and they become a little bit immune to it all. So those are sort of big takeaways for the nonprofit. Time, ambiguity of results, lack of feedback, and then I'd like to talk about the foundation's own ecosystem that I saw in foundations, because there's an ecosystem in foundations, certainly not Cerner, and I'm not talking about any of the ones I'm associated with, because I got it, but there are unwittingly certain things that may be difficult for a foundation operate. The first one is, in the air conditioning and in the heat, there's an arrogance molecule that floats around. And this arrogance molecule manifests itself several ways, unwittingly to those who breathe the air, I'm convinced. They don't want it to, it just does. So what happens? I had one of my program officers, this is just, I'm going to give you some factoids, call in, so-and-so called. I told them they wanted to have a 30-minute conversation about X. This happened to be someone I knew. And I said I could return the call 2 weeks from Thursday. Honestly, 2 weeks from Thursday. We got that corrected pretty quickly. We see over time, as much as they don't want to, program officers in time will start thinking of, instead of stewardship of someone else's money, they will start thinking of it as their own at some level. They start becoming arbitrary. They start recommending arbitrary program changes. Some of them are the nicest people. They get into being nice. And one of the downsides of being nice is slow no. When it's going to be no early on to a request, rather than a respectful, quick no with why, we're into slow no's. You know all this. You've seen this happen. And it became a rather difficult thing to deal with. And so we constantly tried to get good feedback. You know, we prided ourselves in our situation of attempting to have, and there are several organizations, third parties that can get grantee feedback with your foundation. But nevertheless, I will tell you the disproportionate power between those that have money and those that are requesting money make it very difficult. That's just sort of something you just have to work through. So then we operated in this environment, and I've been working with Geyser all these years. So what does a quality foundation, what are the things look like, and how should it be structured, and what are the characteristics? So I'm going to stop right here now. Is everybody tracking with me? Am I making sense to all the folks here? Okay. I would say the quality foundations reflect what I would call intentional, I would say disciplined intentionality about three big areas. Disciplined intentionality about three big areas. And after those three big areas, there's several sub-things that come from it. But I'm going to keep it big here, and then we can kind of bore down a little bit. The first, I'm going to start with people. This is a big deal. What are the kinds of people that make an effective foundation? Let me back up and tell you why does an effective foundation make it hard? The most overarching problem with a foundation is, of course, there's no accountability. Right? Because I came from a profession, you know, there was one law, and that law in the press was there shall be no law. And yet, there was no chaos and there was order. You know why? Because there was accountability in the free marketplace, and you had to be answerable to your audience, you had to be answerable to advertisers, you had to be answerable to your employees, and there was a discipline to running a good organization. In the foundation world, as Joel and Tom said in their book, and Jim Collins has said in his management books, effectiveness is actually a decision you have to make. Maybe you said impact is a decision. You said something like that. But basically, if you don't decide to be really effective, you won't be. And I kind of, since we're in this academic environment, let me kind of, to me, it was a little bit like this. We could take a course, and the course could be pass-fail. And the course could be, let's solve a big social problem that will impact society in a positive way, and we want you to write a paper about it and tell us how you do it. I guess this is not unlike what you do to some extent, not unlike it. Now, right across the hall is the same course. There's something you ought to know. This course is going to be graded. And not only that, we're not going to grade on the curve. We're going to be tough graders. So you're going to get feedback. Of course, you're going to learn some, but it's going to be a little bit more painful. And oh, by the way, this course back here that's pass-fail, it isn't pass-fail. It's pass-pass. Because you can't do it. If you do it, if you make, you know what the consequences are of making a bad grant? Right? So it's up to you as a foundation to impose a discipline, what I call disciplined intentionality, about three big things to say to yourself, we're not going to be in the middle of the bell curve here. We want to have impact, and we want to hold ourselves accountable. But the human forces pushing against that are vast, so it's hard to do. So I just want to tell you, running a foundation to be impactful is hard to do, and the overarching thing is to have an unrelenting commitment to making an impact. The heck with process, the heck with all the other stuff, you want to have impact. Okay, so where do you start? You start with having the right kind of people. And I think there are 4 characteristics that I have learned make great foundation CEOs and senior executives. I asked several CEOs of foundations when I joined, Ed among them, can you be an A-level foundation without having A-level people? No. Without exception. You cannot do it. So one of the things I had to figure out, and I've learned, what is an A-level person? What does it take to be an effective foundation executive? I think there are 4 cornerstones I start with. Character, intellectual capacity, passion, being mission-driven, and humility. This business requires a servant's mentality to be maximally effective, in my opinion. I've seen it done many other ways. You give me intellectual capacity and character coupled with mission and humility, you've got something to work with. Then we can talk about chemistry, your background. We can talk about everything else. But we got to start with that because I can't develop that. And let me speak a moment about the importance of passion. Passion doesn't substitute for focus, which I'll talk about in a minute, but passion drives focus, it drives strategy, it overcomes obstacles, it perseveres, it pursues, and it wins. And in business, there's a term that execution trumps strategy, right? And in my world, passion trumps a lot of sense. And thus, I look for it in my senior program officers and my CEOs when I look for senior leadership. So, point two, second thing, focus. I mean, high focus, not on outputs, but on impact. What does success look like to you when you're done? Does anyone know? You know, most board members, when you ask the foundation, what does success look like at your foundation? Most of them don't know. It's very important to have a focus, and I don't mean a focus. You probably, at a foundation the size that I've been associated with, you have several that you have, how you describe success. And once you have focus and can outline what success looks like, sometimes you can actually measure with metrics, like we're trying to reduce the fertility rate in Ethiopia from 6 to 4, and then to 3, something like that. But some you can't. And we all know what Einstein said about metrics, but we know that describing success is important. Once you can do that, that's when you use business terms, like strategy. I mean, you sort of get a plan to get to the outcome. Now, my colleague at Hewlett, Paul Brest, and I started within a few months of each other, so we compared notes. And he really taught me about the importance of something called theory of change. Right? He's driven a lot of grantees totally off the wall, asking for their theory of change. Paul was right, though. And that is when you see the goal and you know what success looks like, you have implicitly decided what your theory of change is for accomplishing that goal. When you have a theory of change, you have a strategy, then you have a business plan, and then you have an evaluation so you can get feedback, so you can make tweaks on that. And you can make mid-course corrections. I flew airplanes, I didn't mention, for many years. You know how you learn to fly? You have someone sitting next to you talking to you all the time. This isn't, you go up and learn to fly for a year and you come back and it tells you if you did it right or not. That isn't how it works. Well, that's the way I like to work with people. I don't like to have feedback sessions once a year. I like to have feedback all the time. It's not a big deal. We're talking all the time, mainly all the good things you're doing. But that way we grow. But in programs, most foundations, they hate doing that. They don't like doing that. And my first moment about, on the evaluation piece, we're still talking about focus, is I introduced the notion we're going to have an evaluation component. We're going to have actually some of our dollars of our grants associated with just evaluating so we can keep track of how we're doing and we can learn. I had a reaction that surprised me, and that is several of my program officers kind of thought we were evaluating them and their programming and their ability to pick good grantees, and thus there was some risk aversion back off from that. Have you ever seen that before? Yeah. I mean, here we are trying to better society and trying to learn, and and yet people didn't like the notion of having feedback so you could do it better. And I have become to think that it's a critical component. Another thing that happens when you actually force the discipline of outlining what success looks like and you do a plan, then you'll find out if you have the right alignment between what your resources are and what it takes to get the job done. Because here's Schlossberg's kind of postulate number 2. Whatever you think it's going to take more. These problems are intractable. And thus, you end up adjusting and being sure that you have the right calibration between resources and problem to be solved. And I would say another benefit of being forces innovation, and it forces collaboration. You know, one of the unnatural, you know, I didn't realize this, you know, foundation collaborating is somewhat of an unnatural act. This like shocked me. I mean, the problem is that, and pick it. And so let's get together and talk about it, and then people start getting a little weird about who's going to get credit for what, and who's going to cede control to whom. Anyway, the whole notion of collaboration probably is a subject in and of itself. But when you're tightly focused and you're really worried about that, innovation and collaboration becomes easier. And another thing that happens is you say no more to grantees. It becomes more clear that we appreciate what the grantee is proposing, but it really doesn't help address the issue that we are addressing. So it's very interesting. A lot of byproducts. So I start with people. I told you, the characteristics and some of the important things about passion, about focus, how important that is, but how hard it is. Remember going from pass to highly graded. Anybody want to do that? Not really, right? Except if you want to get the job done and you'll grow from it. And I don't know if it was in your book or it was in Paul's book, but the learning, when you want to be effective, it means you learn. And when you learn, it's sort of like compound interest in the financial words, because you see, you keep getting better. And so it's a model for improving your ability to get to successful outcomes. And then there's the other triumvirate. People, focus, and then there's this other one. Anyone want to guess what it is? Governance, boards. This could be a whole hour's conversation right here, couldn't it? Let me talk about boards first. First thing I want everyone to remember is this, if anything. Boards matter. Boards matter. I've been blessed with being involved with some great boards, and others don't. Let me talk a little bit about the boards. I'll talk about both kinds. Ed, when I was telling Ed a couple months ago, maybe it was a couple weeks ago, what I was going to talk about, he said, well, be sure you talk about what can go wrong. Now, I'm an expert on that, so I'll have a few things to tell you about that. But the first thing I would say about a board is the quality of your area of focus and your people. It's important for the board to be unified behind the chief executive officer and the senior staff. It's important that the board and the chief executive officer and the senior staff have unambiguous understanding about who is responsible for what, who can make what decisions, and what running with everybody. Very important that everybody gets that. It's important that the board get it and not micromanage. They certainly be involved with having financial resources to align themselves with the plan. Very important that they not micromanage. Very important that, and I would say Woody Allen is wrong on the fact that 80% of life is showing up. Not just show up, but be engaged in it. Good boards are all in. I mean, some are more verbal than others, but everybody's engaged. No factions. Everybody buys the program. And, in terms of active and passive, boards should generally tilt towards being more active than passive. The chairman should be more active in having dialogues with the CEO. And the board where you have a CEO and maybe a committee head who kind of dominate everything and work with the CEO, that isn't fulfilling. And the other thing I've come to conclude, and I'd be interested in what you all think who've been on boards, I think there's a personality type that actually works well on boards and ones that don't. And it actually doesn't have anything to do with sort of your success. It has to do with sort of your EQ, not your IQ. And it has to do with, I believe, first of all, boards are a team sport. And regardless of what you did and do in your regular life, when you come to a boardroom, you sort of check your ego there at the door, and we're part of a team. On my board was the CEO of Packard, had 100,000 employees. And if you were watching behavior at our board meeting, you couldn't pick him out from anyone else. most delightful, thoughtful, engaged, but not inappropriately dominating person. It was fantastic. So the personality type is high EQ, someone who's a learner. Remember this too. Beware of people with too many answers. Questions are harder. Answers come. You want a board member who's inquisitive, who's learning, who actually wants to learn from other board members and respects and listens to their point of view. And a board member who is not only respectful of others, but respectful of the intractable problems that the foundation is trying to address. A couple of younger demographic board members I've been involved with kind of didn't quite thought the problem was as big as it was. And that makes a good, healthy dynamic in a board. No factions and high engagement. Sometimes you have in foundations family board members. Packard Foundation had family board members. We had 5 family, and we had more non-family, I think 8 non-family. And the family really used effectively the other board members for advice for them to drive the foundation. That was a little bit of a different model. But I'm talking about generically a foundation that doesn't have family members. Having a, I know a former Secretary of Defense, who will go nameless, that was on a foundation board, and no one else in the foundation board liked going to the meetings because, one, he did most of the talking, and if anyone else did, they got eviscerated. So that isn't helpful to moving forward. So, but boards are very important for an effective, good decision-making foundation. So, people, focus, governance. What can go wrong? What are the things I've seen that have kind of gotten in the way here? I'll start with the people side. When we talk about character, integrity, passion, and what was my fourth? Humility. The fact of the matter is that has to be a live evaluation all the time. In other words, sometimes people change in their jobs, and feedback needs to be given to foundation executives. And some people deal through with term limits, but whatever the mechanism, people get a little stale sometimes in their job, and that can go a little bit skewed. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes unrelated program officers end up becoming the grantee's representative to the foundation, as opposed to the foundation. I mean, they go native, right? And that isn't helpful because you want a program officer being so constant evaluation. I mean, the point is it requires management. When I went to the foundation, I thought, well, it's just something we do in due course. It's not that easy to do, and again, it takes discipline. So that's on the people front. I would say that's the easiest thing to address, but it happens quite frequently. On the focus area, I will tell you 2 things happen. Mission creep. Things that are just like what you were focused on, and they're really worth doing, and you kind of like the grantee, and one thing leads to another, and all of a sudden you're doing it. And then another thing is, even when you sort of succeeded, you fall in love with what you're doing. And this happens in real business too. And it's hard to stop it. You like the people, you like the product, but if you are really starting from scratch, zero budgeting, you wouldn't do it anymore. So the two big things that can go wrong on that are, again, mission creep and not being tough-minded about what you're already doing. I told Joel last night I had a program officer who discontinued the program with appropriate. Is that for me or is that for you? Am I done talking? I thought maybe that was Kathy's signal that I'm talking too much. Kathy, no. So the mission creep thing is a real thing, and the key for boards and for foundations to remember is not to do more, but to focus more. And under my tenure at the Packard Foundation, we went from 5 big programs to 3 big programs, and as I was mentioning spoke to you.
Until recently.
Until recently. So that was only on Facebook, but we're at least we're Facebook friends, and she requested the friendship, so I thought that was good. So I quickly said I would be her friend, so which I'm glad to be. But you take this, and what we have to remember on the people front in all of this is that in the foundations, it is privileged work, it is special work. Because Congress has allowed us, I don't know, billions of dollars of money that didn't go to them for us to use for the public good, and it's pretty doggone serious business to do it right, in my view. And the governance part, boards are hard. I gave you some big picture stuff. Having a high EQ, having the ability to get the right balance between management discussion and management education, united behind the CEO. But there's some things in the nonprofit boards I got associated with that sort of surprised me. I'll just pass on to you that really can go awry. Basic things. Getting agendas out to high-quality board members on time, getting materials out to them on time, having the meetings start and end on time. When these things don't happen, high-quality volunteers who are busy get a little bit disillusioned. And this is just sort of like, I know this is like one-on-one, but I want to pass this on to you because this is what happens. And it can't happen if you want to attract the very best and brightest in the nonprofit world. I am convinced that this sector, for it to be all it can be, must get better. It simply must get better. Now, what about the future? What do I see kind of coming around the corner here? Just a couple of things. Ed and Joel are certainly have much better vision than I do about these things, but I see a couple of things. One is that the talk about impact is more now, it seems to me, than it was 10 years ago. And that's one of the reasons is younger people are getting involved, younger entrepreneurs are getting involved, and they're thinking about social returns, and they're getting more active. And I see that happening. I think it's a good thing. One of my colleagues and the founder of eBay, as many may have read about Pierre Midyard, he doesn't want to be constrained by his foundation only dealing with 501c3s. He's so focused on the problem, he doesn't care how you get to it. It could be through a for-profit, it could be through equity, it could be, you want to talk about a guy focused. Most of the fact, we normally look at it through certain curves on the road, pretty wide curves, but they're kind of like the nonprofit normal tools. Pierre's not doing that. He's through that curve out. He's over here. He's doing investing and doing the hybrids, which I think is a good thing. One of the things that shocked me about the foundation world is their insecurity, if you will. Now, Edward R. Murrow, some of you guys remember who Edward R. Murrow is, right? Okay, I know you do, right? Okay, he was a journalist. And one of the things he said was, when it comes to criticism themselves, journalists are the most thin-skinned people he knows. I would tell you this, Edward R. Murrow didn't know foundation people. Foundation people abhor criticism and abhor sharing. I've been involved just talking about what we're going to put on the web, kind of letting people have some lights into us, and it will surprise you to see the reluctance for transparency. I come from a profession where I am totally convinced that light makes one better. Shedding light on institutions makes one better. Of course, there are certain situations where you can't do that. I understand that. But the inherent notion of allowing people to see what you're doing and how you're doing and why you're doing it needs to grow among foundation people. Now, there's been some great work done on this. I think the independent sector is doing some work on this. Others are. Carol Larson, who's president of the Packard Foundation, who's chairman of council foundations that I mentioned to you, has mentioned to me that she's more hopeful than she was in the past. But this is an area that I see in the future. The transparency issue needs to. So I see hybrids, I see strategic philanthropy, however you want to call it, and I see transparency kind of changing over the next several years. I'm afraid I'm taking up all your airtime here, so I'm going to conclude other than to say that where I started, I'm still learning this stuff. I get ahas every once in a while, and I change my mind and I modify where I am. But I've continued to be impressed by the fact that I mentioned to some journalists this morning. No, I guess it was at lunch in the media. The media fellows. We're talking about how things could be better, and I want you all to remember something. I'm not a Catholic. I'm an Episcopalian, so it's what they say, Catholic without the guilt, right? But there's something in the Catholic Mass that I think is sort of appropriate for the foundation world, which is that when you think of the church, remember to keep the faith of the church and not its sins. So the foundations have a lot of issues, and by definition, there's a lot that can be done. But the amazing work that's been done by this sector for a long time, and Joel's documented a lot of it in his book, is truly astounding. And there's a whole lot that goes below the radar screen you don't see. And even in my little town that go on, it's just absolutely inspiring to see the kind of work that goes on in these kind of institutions. So, Rome isn't burning in this issue. What we're trying to do is build some cathedrals in Rome to make it even better, and to make this sector even more effective. And I'm hopeful we will. Great. So that
sounds like the outline of a book that's coming.
Kathy says the same thing, that I need to write a book. I will tell you what I'd like to write a book about is phone calls I've gotten at the LA Times. You want to talk about the difference between the foundation world and this world. If I had 1% of my folks at the LA Times upset with me, I have 10,000 angry people every day. Okay? Wet papers, bad stories, misspellings, bad pictures. Famous CEOs, we may write a bad story and they'd say, well, yeah, but I don't care about the story, but why did you use that picture? Get a better picture. I used to tell them we'd take 2 pictures in case the first one turned out. But the feedback I got was massive, and then all of a sudden I go to the Packard Foundation and I like, now, and whatever I got, fantastic. And so Paul Brest and I often kid each other that suddenly in one day we became omniscient. He was the dean of a law school, so no one ever told him he was doing anything right either. So we both came from these environments where we got a lot of criticism, and most of it earned, to a place where we never got any. And that obviously we have to work with. So,
thank you, Dan.
You're welcome. You actually get it ironed out, but it is death to have the CEO going down one path and members of the board convincing that it's the wrong path over here. That's a cancer in the organization. You just can't tolerate it.
Yeah, but I'm thinking, what if some members of the board think it's the right path and some don't?
Yeah, no question about it. That can happen. Well, first of all, if the members that don't are the kind of people that can't recognize that maybe they're mistaken, that there are reasonable points of view, then, I've had that situation and we actually thought their life might be better if they weren't on the board. On the other hand, if we had some members on the board who say, I don't agree with that, but I get that. I understand that. Let's test it and we'll see. That's different. It takes a personality type, but if someone who's going to be a constant troublemaker or someone who's going to be constantly unhappy by which way you're going, and we had that situation. I've been involved in that. That person's lowest times when he was at the board. Lowest times. He was just totally against what we were doing. It wasn't good for him. And he was alone, and it wasn't serving purpose for him to be there. So I think it depends. Do you have another point of view?
No, it is a difficult question because I've been on boards where the hardest thing in the world for a foundation board to do is to decide what it wants to do. Because it can do anything. It can do anything within whatever, however narrowly defined the mission of the foundation is. You have lots of choices about what to do, and reaching agreement among all the members of the board about what to do is very, very difficult. But once you reach the agreement and you get the buy-in, then people ought to stick with it. And you can't have an effective organization otherwise. Right?
Yeah, the CEO and management deserves the support of the board once the board said if we're going to do that, it really is destructive of us. It's a tough one, though. It's a real life human problem. It's a good question. Yes, sir.
And sort of a follow-up to that, in your experience, have you put time into that kind of organizational development to kind of bring in, do training for the board on how to on decision making or group decision making, or to create some? I know early sort of processes is important than results, but in terms of getting this right,
it's a very good question. Well, as a matter of fact, I ran what I was going to say to you all by the CEO of the Kaiser Foundation, saying, does this sound right to you? Help me do it better. He said, not only does it sound right, it's great. He said, why don't we use this as a training opportunity for our board? And we have a board meeting this Thursday and Friday. And Thursday afternoon, I'm going over board behavior and these kind of things with our board. Because even the most sophisticated people, and you all know this, you guys are, very, very bright. It always helps to go back to basics and learn things, right? It always helps. And so we're going to have a session on effective boards this Thursday afternoon, an executive session, which I think will be helpful. And we have some new board members. We have a very diverse board. I don't mean in terms of just gender and color, but I'm talking in terms of attitude, life experiences, age, the whole thing. So it'll be kind of a cohesive time for us to remember. And one of our newest board members doesn't quite know the line between boardsmanship and management. Wants to help a lot. All well intended. And of course the staff is freaking out. And it's all, again, it's the best intentions of this board member who wants to show that she's engaged. But we're going to use this is sort of a subtle way I'm going to talk to everybody. I'm going to be looking at everybody but talking to her about that particular issue. And actually I think effective CEOs know how to train and engage boards. It's a real art form for an effective CEO, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
I think that's one of the things that I look for in a CEO, to know how to bring that together and give a sense of unity and purpose. There's one thing a board should do that I didn't mention that I think is mission critical. Have fun. This is joyous work. This is about as good as it gets, this kind of work. And I'm on a couple of boards that, nonprofit boards, where people, when they see each other, everyone's hugging and high-fiving, and we're doing the work, and we're just having a great time. And there are a couple of other boards where we get ready to troll into the lugubrious board meeting, which is like, when is this going to be over? And part of it has to do with the CEO, I think, making it a joyful experience, engaging them. But it's also part of the chemistry of the board. But I think this is fun stuff.
Is the presence of that board member who wants to micromanage so much a mistake in choice at the beginning that you're now having to do the whole meeting too, in order to correct?
Well, it's not a whole meeting; it's an hour of the meeting. So it's not going to be a whole meeting. No, I don't think so, because I think she's new and she's youthful, and I think it's going to be a development experience for her. And the CEO has asked me to mentor her personally after the meeting to talk about this. So I don't think so. She's got the characteristics I mentioned to you about. Let's face it. If you don't know what it's like to be a board member, it's easy to get it wrong the first couple times out. So I think we always ought to presume innocence and have them prove to you they're the wrong person. So
it's also really important to note that there are different kinds of boards. That what Dick has described is a large family foundation, but it's a large board. I don't know the Packard daughters. So I don't have you know, and I'm not trying to single them out, but there are people here in the room who are involved in family foundations where you couldn't get the kind of cohesion among the agreement among all the members of the family that would produce the kind of outcome, because every battle is a new battle, and just in what fits within the strategy. And it is, I know Tom Lambert, who's sitting right over there, used to be the director of the C. Smith Reynolds Foundation, and
whose president is sitting beside him.
Yeah, I understand that. But it may not still be the case. But I remember when Tom told me this, that I thought it was a little surprising in a sense. It is a family foundation, but when the executive director goes in, or are you president or executive director? Or they
president.
President. Okay. They raised the title when Tom left, I suppose.
No, it's always been president.
It's always been president. Okay. Well, whenever the chief executive officer of the foundation and the staff would propose things, they never knew whether the board was going to approve it or not. I mean, in a sense, it was maybe 80 to 85% of the proposals that went from the staff to the board, they knew were going to get approved, but they didn't know which ones were necessarily the ones.
Wow.
So, that's very different from the situation that you described, and very different from the situation in most of the professionally run foundations, where when the staff makes a recommendation, the board may ask lots of questions and should. The fact of the matter is, they always approve it. That's a very different, and it's very different dynamic. And it's also different when you've got a living single donor, isn't it, Pierre? When you've got a single donor who is the donor of the foundation, he is the person whose approval is required for anything that you want to do. That's a totally different dynamic. So when you think about boards, you've got to think about what the context is. You've got to think about the makeup of the boards. But the important point to remember is that the boards are the only part of the organization that give any kind of accountability to a foundation. Other than the boards, nobody gives feedback to the staff.
But the board is the only one that can really demand accountability for the focus areas, right?
Absolutely correct.
Only the board.
That's exactly right.
So
let me push that with a specific example and see what you think. The largest foundation in the world, the Gates Foundation, has a board of 3. And it's a husband, a wife, and the dad. And there's a CEO who I'm not sure exactly whether he is a former board member or not. So when you have a foundation that's giving away $3 billion, give or take, a year, how do you look at that as a governance issue? Do you think that there's room, good room for criticism here? Do you think it inhibits the work of the foundation? How do you look at? I'm not asking to diss the Gates Foundation, but to give a sense of this most unique organism.
Yeah, and you could also look at the way Berkshire Hathaway in the private sector is run. It doesn't fit all the governance things.
That's for sure.
And yet, results aren't that bad. Well, first of all, I will say a disclaimer. I love the Gates Foundation. I just love the fact that as a young man, he set an example to give back to the extent he's doing. I love the fact that, remember I mentioned the focus thing? You want to talk about a guy who's focused. They got it, right? The grantee environment, as you probably know, working with the Gates Foundation, isn't that fulfilling experience from the grantee's point of view. But I don't find fault with how they do it. I think that there's the unique situation, which is worrying about the mega issues, and I wouldn't want to change their focus or change how successful they've been. And I love the fact that Warren Buffett basically said, here's a guy, you want to talk about no ego. Here's a guy who's given all his money to the Gates Foundation. I don't think he's saving any. He did have his own. His wife worked with us at the Packard Foundation. She's think it's a model. There's more things right with the Gates Foundation. I just wouldn't want to criticize it, frankly. I think it's fantastic.
And I don't think Ed was criticizing it.
No, I don't think so either. No.
But it is a different board dynamic.
Totally bored. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of, that's a case where they think of it as their money. You and I were talking before. One of the interesting things with family foundations that can be somewhere that, a conversation that creates some tension is, to whom does that money belong? Is it the public? I mean, or is it actually the family's money? And depending on if you're in the family or not, you may have a different point of view about that. But there was a big tax break. The American public has said, we're going to do this, so this can be used for public betterment. So, but I have no doubt Bill and Melinda Gates think of it as their money. With you, I have no doubt about that.
More Bill.
More Bill. Yeah.
I think this is fascinating. At the beginning and the end of your talk, you referred to the people who lead foundations as having difficulty getting bad news from people. Now, obviously, the board is one source, but I guess I want to push you. That seems to be true of CEOs in industry as well. That is, you certainly know whether you're making money or not. But what I'd like you to talk about how they're different, and also what strategies you use to get the facts when people want to please you.
Right. For a CEO in private industry, getting feedback internally is hard because everybody's kissing up at some level. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The organization causes that. But you have a market that's giving you all sorts of feedback all the time about the health and effectiveness of your organization. That's what I'm talking about. The foundation CEO does not have a market to give him feedback. Right. That's the distinction.
Okay.
And I think that makes it extremely difficult. And an effective CEO and a private enterprise actually learns how to see things in 3D and stereo. And you'll do skip interviews, you'll get around, you'll create an environment where you can actually hear things that are unpleasant. And I think, again, it's an art form for a CEO to know how to do that. Some CEOs, just by how they behave, are telling people they don't want bad things. Other CEOs are fantastic about it. So it's not universally true. I think there is a learned skill to it. But the benefit of the CEO in a private enterprise is, by golly, that market out there is telling you all the time and giving you a report card.
Moreover, it is, Joel, you know this better than I do, but my observation is that if you look at well-run corporate boards, there are people on there who can be loving critics of the CEO, and they, of course, have access to the information that's coming in from all these different markets. And they can really make an extraordinary difference. And we've seen plenty of situations in which the directors have forced out CEOs because they were not performing the way the board wanted to. Foundations just don't have any of that.
Right.
Just
in fact, what happens is the board members get subject to the same thing the CEOs do, getting loved up by all the grantees, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly right.
That's what happens, and so they're not getting good feedback.
You talked a little bit about your transition from the business world to the foundation world, which I imagine was somewhat jarring, but I'm struck that your military background seems very strongly to have influenced your personal and intellectual style. And I'd have thought in some ways that the gap there is even greater.
And why do you say, Joel said the same thing to me, that I have this military thing somewhere baked into me.
Yeah. Why do I say that there's dissonance between the two kind of approaches, or why do I say
actually my hair fell out? I don't keep it short.
I would be hard pressed to say exactly what formed that impression. I'm pleased to hear I'm not the first to have observed.
No, you're not. No, I get it all.
You should ask his wife.
There's a certain orderliness about your presentation that I think in the foundation world there's in part because of the amorphousness of the problems. Sometimes great difficulty in kind of organizing thoughts in as crisp a way as you have. But on the other hand,
I'm turning this into a compliment now.
Well, I think initially it's a criticism, but as between the two, I prefer compliments.
No, that's a good point.
But weren't you, I guess I'm a little surprised even that the foundation world reached out to you, though. I think more foundations probably should value that kind of background. But
well, I was surprised too, actually.
But I also think that you found it kind of jarring at first and had to grapple with it.
In fact, the family asked me to visit with them, and at the completion of the interview, I remember telling one of the kids, and they were all there, I said, you know, this job isn't for me. I'm not really a non-profit person. I'm a for-profit person, and that's been all my experience. So I want to help you get, see other people that was interesting. And I had a couple of other situations I was looking at. One of them was two great situations, and then it turns out a month later, they said, you know, we thought about that. The fact that you're not a nonprofit guy, I give credit to them for being, not because of picking me, but picking someone odd, or who didn't fit the mold. You know, it wasn't the university president. It was not the normal thing, but they wanted someone to bring a little something different. I have great affection for their gutsiness, not only in that, but in all things. They tackle big, huge problems and aren't afraid of it. They're a Packard family, and great admiration. And the longer the time frame, the more difficult it is. That's fine with them. Just to give you a quick example, we went to India with the family, and we got feedback as to where we should do some work with women's reproductive health population, this kind of thing. We were already doing some work with the Gates Foundation and HIV and AIDS. And they said the one place you don't want to go is a place called Bihar State. Bihar is the most poverty-stricken, and besides being poverty-stricken, it's corrupt. So there's no good NGOs, no good government institutions. That's where you don't want to go. So you know where we went.
And what was the bottom line?
Well, bottom line is we made a huge impact there. Kathy went with me on one trip there, and we were out there in the middle of the field, sleeping, essentially under the stars. And after
this is the trustees too?
No trustees, but the staff and me. Oh. And we were like under the blanket there and out there in the middle of nowhere. And I said, you know, it's hard to be thinking about the things that normally impact our life when you're out here with these people. And but I give the family credit for not shying away. And it was sort of why they brought someone like me and my background in. They wanted to try something a little bit different. And I think we had a great time. It was great. And I learned, I got a lot more than I gave, I will tell you.
And Dick, what was the reason for the
well, it was heartfelt. I've been there 5 years. I turned 60 years old. Kathy and I had our kids very early. Our youngest one, Joel Stoll, brought her to Duke in 1986. So we were empty nesters at age 41. And our kids went away, and one went to medicine, one to Vanderbilt. Debbie came here. And the short form is our son went to San Antonio to practice medicine. He's a pediatrician. Our daughter got her law degree actually, but she loves teaching, so she was teaching in Colorado, and they went to visit my son, and they decided they wanted to be together. My son and daughter wanted to be together, and they wanted their kids to know each other. And this, frankly, it made Kathy's and my heart sing that this happened. So my whole family is there. And I was having breakfast with Kathy one morning in Palo Alto. I said, you know, there are 9 people in my life I want to see a lot of. I married you. The other 8 live 5 miles from each other in San Antonio, Texas. She said, oh, are we going to get a condo and come and visit a lot? I said, well, how about doing something really aggressive? And frankly, I didn't want to miss the time. I wasn't Silicon Valley wealthy or anything like that, but we had enough. And I left because I wanted to devote some time to having some downtime with my family. I mean, it sounds like a little odd, maybe. People say I'm lucky to live near my family. I said I am lucky. I left a great job, sold my house, and left my friends. I went to a place I never didn't know anyone.
It's now smoking.
and it's now on fire. But I tell people it was really great. In one 3.5-hour flight, I went from who's who to who's he. It was great. It was great. So that's why I laughed. But I'm still very much involved with California institutions and philanthropy, so I didn't feel like I totally left. But it was a trade-off. That was it.
You may or may not want to comment on this, but for those of you who don't know, the background, the Packard Foundation, there were 4 children. There were 4 children in the family, 3 sisters and a brother. And at one point, the brother decided, I guess there were just disagreements about what the focus of the foundation should be at that point. And so the decision was really made to let the brother basically take a share of the foundation and go off and have his own foundation. That happens a lot in family foundations. This particular case, it was one of the largest foundations in the country, and it was unusual. Were you there when that happened?
Yes, it was right after I got there.
It's a matter of public record.
No, it's a public record. It was a great thing, and it was not. I will say one thing: these 4 kids in the Packards, they were all like any family. They're all different. They never let any squabbling occur in the forum of the foundation. They didn't use the foundation to argue. They didn't do that. They were together on that. Matter of fact, when the son decided this, the son had different politics and he had different interests. And as Joel said, we broke off as part of his own foundation. He got $1.6 billion to start his own thing, which was a good thing. But he stayed in our building. He's down the hall.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it was all simpatico. And he was happier, and I would say the sisters were happier, and the foundation went on. It was just one of those things that worked out well. But I would say the one thing that is challenging now, but that I give great admiration to Dave and Lucille Packard, the founders, is those 4 kids, at the end of the day, they love each other. And if you love each other, all sorts of good things happen. And that covers a lot. And I give them great credit. Now, I think as with any family, when you start getting the next generation, now you're getting, the 4 I've been involved with have been great. They all had the same mom and dad. Now we have the next generation starting. They're cousins, right? They have the same grandparents, but different parents. And then, as you all know from your own cousins, there's what I would call the normal cousin competitive stuff going on. And though I'm not there right now, I understand it's working extremely well. But it's a different dynamic that all family foundations face, is how you get the next generation.
And just to mention, just a counter example to that, which occurred when a few people here will know. I'm not going to mention the name of the foundation, but I was on the board of the family foundation. I was part of the membership corporation that appointed the trustees of that foundation. And there were 3 branches of the family. And one of the branches of the family simply could not get along with the others. And this included not so much the branch heads, but their children. And they couldn't even be civil with respect to one another in the context of the foundation. And ultimately, the 3 corporate members of the corporation decided we had to break it up, basically. And we did. We broke it. 3 separate foundations and sent them all off. Figured at least they can talk to one themselves, but we could not get along with one another. So the world of family foundations is a very complicated world. Most of them work effectively. Ed was head of the Certain Foundation, which is one of the oldest family foundations in the United States and one of the largest foundations. Ed took it to the point where it at one point had very close to $1 billion, which is pretty large for most family foundations. And they got along reasonably well. There were how many members of the family were there?
Well, when I left, there were over 400. But those who knew each other and allied, corporations were about 75.
And they voted on people to go on the board in succession. The models are just really very varied, but every foundation, every family foundation is a sui generis kind of enterprise, and it takes a great deal of skill for somebody to run it as the executive director trying to represent a family where they don't always. Jamie, you've been trying to say something.
No, sorry, I was going to ask a question, so please, finish.
That's okay.
No, I wanted to ask a question because I know Joel and Tom place emphasis on taking a long-term view for investments within our foundations, and in particular building a collaborative environment with your grantees. I'm just wondering, how do you balance the need to focus on impact, which is taking more of an objective short-term view to results, with the importance of keeping a long-term vision of the problem and building a strong relationship that's open and transparent with grantees?
Yeah, I don't know that I equate impact with short term. I wouldn't either. No, I don't accept that one. I mean, I hear you. We're trying to lower the fertility rate in Ethiopia. And I'm working with the government and the church. Actually met with the prime minister, met with the head of the church, talking about what it ought to look like in 2020. That's long, and we had metrics there, and we had other grantees we worked with. So on the issue of impact and time, I do think that you take a longer point of view. What you do is you develop coincident indicators to track if you're making progress. And again, I think the grantee foundation relationship has to do with all these things are very much personal and trust relationships that come about and how you treat each other. And when they know you're not getting when you're in it for the long term and you're trying to get better and trying to improve, and we're not questioning whether we're going to give you more grant money, it improves it. Yeah, I think that's sort of one of the keys, is the trust relationship. Building a trust relationship in all things, even when foundations are collaborating, it's critical. And believe it or not, it's an unnatural act because foundations like to control, and you seek control. It's one thing I love working with Hewlett and with Irvine, with a couple of the other foundations where we were. It was a total trust relationship. To the point, I will give you an example. Paul and I would invite each other to dinners when we were recruiting prospective program officers. Together we would recruit for the other guy's foundation to show right off the bat how we thought of working together. And did that with Irvine as well. It's unusual.
And one of the largest collaboratives in the history of philanthropy was one that was done jointly by the Hewlett Foundation and the Packard Foundation. $1 billion that they basically put into a separate organization called Climate Works, focusing on climate change grant making, essentially. But they put the money into the single organization and turn it loose. That almost never happens.
Right. We have the program officer from Hewlett, who is the CEO of Climate Works, a guy named Hal Harvey, and the chairman of Climate Works on the board is from the Packard Foundation, Bill Riley, who some of you may know, former EPA chief.
He is the chairman of the board of visitors to the Nicholas Institute for Environmental Solutions at Duke.
Is he?
Yeah.
Oh, well, a great guy. But I think the takeaway point, I mean, you bring up very good points, but the takeaway point is, again, things that should be seemingly not that difficult actually are in real life, like collaboration and trust building. You have to work at it. One other thing, well, you get the point.
Let me just jump in to reflect that we have students in the room as well, and you're heartily invited to ask questions too. So, and some of you were in my class, so you're particularly invited, but you don't have to.
That's your order.
Your class pass fail, by the way, or pass?
You're being graded.
Yes. Throw the cards up.
Throw the cards up.
All right. Laura.
I've done some reading about the Packard Foundation, how you tried to measure your impact a little bit more through increasing discussion with grantees, through getting their feedback, and also, as you mentioned, working in logic models and theories of change. How do you get your program officers on board to make those changes and to stick with them? That's very difficult.
It becomes part of the culture, and training and discussion, and it just becomes baked into the system. and because it's not natural. But I give Carol Larson great credit, and her vice president of programs, a guy named Chris McCarty, a great guy, who constantly, remember the most important thing, constantly caring about impact and not worrying about process and all these other peripheral things, because in a foundation, all this other stuff's happening all the time. You got to stay on the impact side, and if the staff gets that, that's what comes from that. And they kind of end up collaborating together with the staff. And some grantees, of course, find it more difficult than others because they haven't thought themselves about their own theories of change. And they know they're doing good. But we ask, but how does it work? It can get uncomfortable. I think we have helped grantees become better nonprofits themselves. As I mentioned to you, our view is they're our partners, not other foundations, basically they're subcontractors. I mean, basically, that's just not how we've done it.
Marty, did you?
I did. You come from the world of news, which I take at times is both a competitive and also a combative exercise in trying to get at truth. You mentioned the need for transparency in the sector, and I'm interested in what you would recommend and how we would bake that into either through statute, regulations, practices to compel more transparency and more disclosure.
Yeah.
And the lessons you're drawing from that
and
against
Joel
that
will be
background.
better at that, what the mechanisms are. I am sort of not for regulation, federal regulation, just because I've not had good experiences with it. I'm more for self-regulation through our own independent sector, having standards. And I think the independent sector can, we can do peer reviews, we can do a lot of things like that that'll help do it. But again, I'd say Joel is more the expert in ed than the federal regulation. Joel, the question came up, what are some concrete ideas about transparency and what can be done regulation-wise and so on. And I'm kind of a fan of self-regulation and self-review. And I knew the independent sector at least was starting some of that. As I recall, you thought there was even some things the federal government can do. I think more regulations from the federal government probably isn't going to happen in the near term. Do you?
No, I don't think it is. And indeed, my strong preference is for self-regulation.
Is it?
Yeah, it's self-regulation, but really serious self-regulation, and that's where the nonprofit, the independent sectors committee on self-regulation had recommendations, which the panel on nonprofits, which was the superior organization, wouldn't buy because there was so much opposition from some of the organized groups in the nonprofit sector that they didn't want to have any kind of enforcement by self-regulation enforcement. I mean, it was really an odd situation in which the committee on self-regulation recommended a mechanism for the sector itself taking some responsibility for the quality of information and also certain kinds of practices that we felt were inappropriate for nonprofit organizations. And the panel on nonprofits, basically because they just there were a couple of large blocks in there that just felt, one of them was the higher education group. They said, well, we're already subject to so much regulation, we think that it would be terrible, that is subject to so much self-regulation, that we think it would be terrible to add another layer on there. So I mean, it was just, in any event, I'm not in favor of government regulation of these issues. And they're very strongly in favor of self-regulation, but self-regulation that's effective. And we don't have self-regulation that's effective at this point.
No.
If I could follow on to that, the one huge problem with government regulation is there isn't a lot of authority to regulate anything but misbehavior.
That's correct.
Trying to affirmatively regulate effectiveness. It's hard to see how they even go about
Can't do that.
They don't have authority to do it.
That's exactly right.
Right. I couldn't agree more.
Tony?
This is a very difficult job market. What would you say to an undergraduate student or a graduate student who's really interested in a path and foundation work?
I would probably say something that they don't want to hear, and that is that I think the best foundation people have worked in the nonprofit world first. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that
I think
completely.
learn the real nitty-gritty of life on the other side, and find out the realities, and find one about which you're passionate. Again, and then foundation executives who have actually served in the field in the technical area are much better if they've done that. So I would say.
So what would you say to a graduate or undergraduate students about the best way in this job market to enter the nonprofit sector?
Well, one has to decide how you comb down, first of all, area of interest, geography, size. I mean, there's a lot of ways to slice and dice this thing. And then go to the websites and develop relationships and hustle.
But I would add that there are certain kinds of skills that somebody can get at the college level or in the professional school level that will stand them in very good stead in nonprofit organizations.
Fantastic.
And the more of those skills, analytic skills that you've got, the more you're used to data and not afraid of data. Because the nonprofit organizations that are working with the most difficult problems are the ones that need people like that. And people come along. It's one of the reasons that increasingly, why do we have a program over in the Fuqua School in the case, the Center for the Advancement of Social Entrepreneurship, that attracts lots of students to get an MBA who want to go into the nonprofit sector. 2 students in my class 3 years ago, one of whom had been working for Habitat for Humanity, and the other one had been working in soup kitchens and wanted to continue on with that, but came to the Fuqua School to get an MBA in order to enable them to do a better job of it. People with those kinds of analytic skills and ability to deal with data, manipulate data, and to measure effectiveness are in great demand in the nonprofit sector where they're hiring. So those are the kinds of skills that equip you to be competitive in that marketplace now, particularly now.
Yeah, Tony, I certainly agree with Joel. Whereas frequently the standard of living of working in a nonprofit might be lower than certainly J.P. Morgan or something of that, or Goldman Sachs. There are other compensations, and if you have, at least my experience, a young person has real fire to go in that direction, smartening them up through the experience of interning in nonprofits, of working in nonprofits, learning the rules of the road there, often with background from Fuqua, from Sanford, from other places, really puts you at the top of the heap. If that nonprofit has to find someone who understands what the metrics are all about, there aren't many people who are coming out of, and I'm not using this disparagingly, say social work school, that are pretty committed and understanding of this. So the job market in the nonprofit world is by no means as poor as it is in philanthropy, but it's a lot harder in many ways. And one of the other reasons I think Dick would agree with Joel is if you go into a philanthropic life too early, you get spoiled too fast. And that's a general statement. And, we've talked about this. And it's very important to be careful that when you're in your mid-20s or early 30s or whatever, and nobody tells you there's anything wrong, as you said, and you're always, eating well. I told one of the students here that when I went from running a small nonprofit organization to running a foundation in 2 weeks, and I went from styrofoam cups and plastic sporks all of a sudden to china and glassware and everything.
And silver.
And silver. And I had to adjust. Well, you can make the adjustment up, but you've got to be careful how you adjust. And there are many people who have a hard time adjusting to the rarefied atmosphere that sometimes comes with working in philanthropy. Not always, but sometimes. Tom, would you agree with that from your perspective?
Are you a long time, Tom? A long time philanthropist?
Oh, is it?
Oh, yes.
We're 25 years more.
Oh, 30.
30 years.
30.
That's kind of interesting.
You're looking very calm from the story.
Let's have one more question.
Almost as always Joel.
That's right, almost.
Anybody got one more question for Dick?
I have one. So, how do you see, the impact investing space evolving? You mentioned it briefly towards the end.
What?
The impact investing space.
Yeah.
And also addressing some of these issues with philanthropy and nonprofit world and J.P. Morgan and mentioning those worlds. But if you could just shed some light on that.
Well, I think it's one big working process right now. I think we're all trying to figure out the various levers to pull to impact, strategic impact on outcomes. And that you will see more and more of it. And I think also what you're finding out is that younger people particularly are wanting to be involved with initiatives like that, whether it's in the for-profit sector or in the nonprofit sector. So I expect it to grow. I expect the hybrid models to grow. And I expect the old traditional foundations to learn from this.
I think his question was a little bit narrower than that. I think he was using impact investing in terms of investing endowment for impact. That is, the movement now. Oh, I think that's what you were talking. Which was that?
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, how do you see kind of that space converging all these themes that we're talking about with measuring impact and transparency, and how will impact investing be a catalyst for that?
Using
your endowment.
Yeah.
Well, this could be the subject for the whole afternoon, right? Discussion. Right? You've been down this road before?
I have not in this group.
Yeah. I think the data is mixed on whether it actually has impact. So I actually am agnostic on what's going to happen because I'm not sure that it actually has proven to do anything. I think at the Packard Foundation, I may be a little bit out of date. We actually have sort of reverse impact. There's certain things we don't do, but we're not into using our endowment. Yeah, we're not into using our endowment for anything other than maximizing philanthropic giving on the other side. So I'm just not an expert in that. So sorry.
For the students who are here, the issue really is it better to use your grant-making money, the income on your endowment, directly to solve the problems that you care about, or is it also worthwhile and maybe better to use to invest your assets, that is the principal of your endowment, and what are the costs of doing that? And so the issue is, do you get better return? What are you foregoing in terms of return if you use some of your money from your endowment in investing in organizations that are working at the problems that you care about? It's a complicated calculus, and there are lots of different views on subject. Tony?
Well, at the highest level, it has a dramatic effect in your definition of your theory of change.
Yes.
It has definition of the business you're in.
Right.
Are you in one business or two with kind of
That's exactly
kind of
right.
income?
Absolutely right.
Kind of important.
Yeah, that's really important.
Well,